My husband vanished, leaving a note that erased a decade, but the final blood-soaked envelope revealed his death was a lie, and now someone is coming for me. The silence in the apartment was thick enough to choke on. It clung to the dusty velvet of the sofa, seeped into the fibers of the rug where we'd celebrated our 5th anniversary just 6 months prior, and settled, heavy and cold, right behind my sternum. I stared at the note, its ink bleeding slightly at the edges as if written in a hurry, or perhaps under duress. "I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. Don't try to find me." That was it. 26 words that erased a decade of shared history, of inside jokes, of carefully curated dreams that now felt like brittle, forgotten photographs. Daniel. He didn't just leave, he evaporated. One moment he was my anchor, the sturdy lighthouse in my often stormy life, and the next I was adrift on a black, starless sea. It wasn't a fight that precipitated this. There was no dramatic slamming of doors, no shouting match over finances or fidelity. It was quieter, slower, like a leak in a dam that you only notice when the basement is already half flooded. For the last year, Daniel had been different, distant. His eyes, usually so warm and direct, held a perpetual shadow, a deep-seated worry I couldn't penetrate. He'd started taking long, secretive phone calls in the garage, his voice dropping to a whisper the second I stepped toward the door. He'd flinch if I touched him unexpectedly. I'd begged him to talk, to tell me what was eating him alive, but he just kept shaking his head, his jaw tight. "It's just work, Alara, I promise. Everything is fine." Lies. Obviously, everything was not fine. I tried calling his cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. His office line was disconnected. The few mutual friends we shared suddenly claimed they hadn't seen him in weeks, their concern sounding a little too rehearsed. It was as if Daniel had used some kind of sophisticated software to scrub himself from the world, leaving me holding the empty frame of our life together. The official reason for his departure, according to the note, was that he couldn't handle us anymore. But that felt like a smokescreen. Daniel loved me. He loved our life. The thought of him leaving voluntarily without a devastating concrete reason was nonsensical. Then came the diagnosis that shattered my attempts at practical grieving. 3 weeks after he vanished, my primary care physician called me in for a follow-up on some persistent fatigue I'd been ignoring. She didn't mince words. Stage 2, lupus, autoimmune attack. Long-term prognosis, difficult, requiring aggressive treatment, lifestyle overhaul, and absolute emotional stability. The irony was a physical blow. He left me precisely when I needed him to stay, precisely when I needed that lighthouse to actually shine its beam. I fell apart not just because of the disease, but because of the utter betrayal of his timing. Why wait until I was clinically ill to pull the rug out from under me? Was he afraid of being a caretaker? Was my body suddenly too much of a burden? Months bled into each other. I started the medication. The steroids made me puffy and exhausted, and I began the tedious, lonely process of restructuring my life around flare-ups and specialist appointments. I sold the larger furniture, downsized the apartment, and tried to convince myself that the sudden, inexplicable absence of Daniel was just another side effect of the chaos inside my own body. One rainy Tuesday, 6 months after he walked out, I was sorting through a box of old tax documents in the back of the hall closet, a box I hadn't dared touch since he left, when my fingers brushed against something stiff and unfamiliar, taped to the bottom of the cardboard. It was a sealed, heavy-duty manila envelope addressed to me in Daniel's familiar, elegant script. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped it. This wasn't a note. It was too official, too thick. It felt heavy, like it contained more than just words. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the quiet afternoon. 6 months of numb acceptance shattered in an instant. I tore the envelope open. Inside, there wasn't just a letter. There were photocopies of official documents, medical bills highlighted in yellow, and a short single sheet of paper folded neatly on top. The letter read, "Ilara, I know I destroyed you. I know this timing is unforgivable. But if you read anything else in this envelope, you will understand why I had to disappear. Please, before you hate me forever, read the attachments and know that every second I was gone, I was working to make sure you survived this. Don't look for me, not yet. Just deal with the paperwork. I love you, always." Tears blurred the paper, but I forced myself to focus on the attachments first. They weren't about us. They were about me. They were medical records, but not mine. They detailed a complex experimental treatment protocol for an extremely rare neurological disorder, a disorder I didn't have. Then I looked at the insurance claim forms attached. They were paid in full, the beneficiary listed as my primary specialist. The source of the massive payment? A shell corporation I'd never heard of. I flipped back to the single sheet of paper, my breath catching in my throat as I read the final cryptic line. "The money is from the only asset I had left that mattered, the one thing that could save you from what was coming next." I scrambled for the last document in the envelope, a brittle photocopy of a death certificate. The name on it was Daniel Hayes. But that was impossible. Daniel was alive. He had to be. I looked back at the date of death, then down at the handwriting, which was undeniably his. I raced to the window, peering out at the street, expecting to see him walking around the corner, laughing at the elaborate, cruel joke he was playing. But the street was empty, save for the incessant drizzle. I looked back at the death certificate, then at the strange payment invoices, and finally at the last item tucked deep in the envelope, a worn silver key ring I recognized instantly, the spare key to the beach cabin we'd never managed to afford. Etched into the metal, barely visible, were 3 initials that chilled me to the bone. D.H. D.H. deceased. Who was this man? And what did his death have to do with my diagnosis, or the money that paid for treatments I didn't even need? As I stared at the certificate, the realization hit me like a physical blow. Daniel hadn't left me because he was tired of us. He had left because he was already gone, or at least the man I knew was rapidly ceasing to exist. Suddenly, the shadowy conversations, the flinching, the forced farewell, it all snapped into horrifying focus. He wasn't running from me. He was running for me. I snatched up the letter again, reading his final sentence one more time. "The money is from the only asset I had left that mattered, the one thing that could save you from what was coming next." I reached for the phone, my fingers trembling too badly to dial. If he was dead, who was working in the shadows paying for my future? And what was coming next that he sacrificed himself to prevent? Just then, my phone vibrated with a notification, a bank alert. A massive unauthorized withdrawal had just been made from my personal savings account, the one account Daniel never had access to. I tapped the alert, and my stomach dropped as I saw the recipient of the transfer, a private medical facility in Switzerland, and the memo line read only one word: initiate. Initiate what? I had no scheduled procedures there. Panicked, I scrolled down to the fine print of the transfer detail and saw the sender's name attached to the transaction, Daniel Hayes. but beneath his name, in parenthesis, was a chilling addendum: via power of attorney, granted November 3rd, 2023. That was 3 days before he left the note, and November 3rd was the day before my lupus diagnosis. I looked at the death certificate again, then down at the Swiss account transfer. If he was dead, who authorized that withdrawal, and why was he setting up my next major medical procedure in a foreign country, without my knowledge, using money from my own account, days before he vanished? I had to call the bank. I had to find out what this facility was, but as I grabbed my car keys, my vision swam, and I noticed something dark pooling around the base of the manila envelope. It wasn't ink or rain. It was blood, fresh and viscous, seeping slowly from the crease where the death certificate had been folded. Someone had been here recently, someone who still had access, and they had just emptied my emergency fund. The sudden, shocking presence of fresh blood on the documents was a physical manifestation of the danger I hadn't realized I was in. It wasn't Daniel's blood. His death certificate stated a quiet passing in a hospice facility, a massive internal hemorrhage, the details vague. This blood felt recent, vital, and terrifyingly close. I dropped the envelope as if it were burning my hands, stepping back against the kitchen counter, every instinct screaming that I was no longer alone in my quiet, small apartment. I looked around wildly. The door was locked. The windows were closed. I hadn't heard a sound over the drumming rain outside. Who could have been here, touching the very evidence of Daniel's sacrifice, and why? My gaze landed back on the key ring, the beach cabin key. That cabin. Daniel's supposed secret retreat where he claimed to go when he needed space. We hadn't been there in years. But if Daniel was planning an exit, a disappearance, or perhaps even staging a death, that cabin was the only physical location he might have frequented recently. I had to get out of the apartment. The fear was crystallizing into a desperate need for action. Lupus fatigue be damned. I snatched my coat, grabbed my purse, and shoved the damning envelope, blood and all, inside. I didn't dare call the police yet. What would I tell them? That my supposedly dead ex-husband left me a trail of cryptic financial paperwork and a blood-soaked envelope. They'd schedule me for a psychological evaluation. The drive to the coast was a blur of white-knuckle terror and blinding rain. Every passing car felt like a threat, every shadow a pursuer. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a dark sedan tailing me relentlessly. Daniel's cryptic message kept looping in my head, save you from what was coming next. Was the danger still active? Was the entity that forced him into staging his death now coming for the beneficiary of his sacrifice? Me? When I finally pulled up to the remote, isolated cabin, the sky was bruised purple with the impending sunset. The place was dark, hunkered down against the churning gray sea. I fumbled with the silver key, my hands slick with sweat, and forced it into the lock. It turned with a heavy, rusty groan that sounded deafening in the silence. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of salt, old wood, and something else. A faint metallic odor I recognized from the envelope. The main room was exactly as we left it years ago, dusty furniture draped in white sheets, the old stone fireplace cold. I moved through the rooms methodically, my heart lodged in my throat. The kitchen, the small bedroom. Nothing seemed disturbed except for a thin layer of fresh dust coating a single object on the desk in the small office nook, an antique leather-bound ledger that definitely hadn't been there before. My hands shook, but this time the fear was tempered by a surge of adrenaline, the same clarity I got sometimes before a flare-up, but directed outward. I knew, with chilling certainty, that this ledger was the final piece. I opened it. It wasn't filled with poetry or shopping lists. It was filled with highly detailed, coded entries, interspersed with photographs. The photos were disturbing. Surveillance shots of public places, a coffee shop, a park bench, my old workplace, and in every single photo, lurking in the background, slightly blurred, was the same figure, a tall man in a nondescript dark coat, wearing a hat pulled low, a shadow. I recognized one of the locations. The day I first showed symptoms of fatigue, months before the lupus diagnosis. Someone had been watching me long before Daniel left. I frantically flipped through the pages, searching for context, for Daniel's handwriting. Near the back, the coded entries stopped, replaced by a single desperate entry written in stark black ink, clearly Daniel's hand. They know about the transfer. They're closing in. If they find Alara, the insurance money won't matter. I had to give them something tangible to prove compliance, something they value more than my life. The only way to buy her time was to take the fall myself, to give them what they wanted, the original asset. Protocol Omega initiated. My death is the decoy. Her escape route is in the hidden compartment of the fireplace mantel. My blood ran cold. Daniel hadn't died of natural causes. His death was a carefully constructed lie, a diversion arranged with an unseen enemy he called they. And the asset he gave them, what was more valuable than his life? I stumbled toward the fireplace, my hands flying over the cold stone. I found the almost invisible seam Daniel mentioned, pushing hard, and a small section of the mantelpiece sprang inward, revealing a dark void. I reached inside and pulled out a small, heavy object wrapped in oilcloth. It wasn't cash. It wasn't a weapon. It was a flash drive, military grade, secured with a complex biometric lock that seemed to respond to body heat. Just as my fingers brushed the smooth metal of the drive, a sound cut through the howling wind outside, the distinct heavy crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Not one car, two, and they weren't slowing down. The cabin, my supposed sanctuary, had been compromised. I spun around, the flash drive clutched so tightly my knuckles were white. Just as the front door shuddered violently under a heavy, deliberate impact. The lock was starting to splinter. They knew I was here. They knew I had the ledger, and now they knew I had the drive that Daniel seemingly sacrificed his entire existence to protect, or perhaps the drive that caused his staged death in the first place. The door cracked open a sliver, revealing a narrow strip of blindingly bright tactical light cutting through the gloom, sweeping the room directly towards me. The sliver of tactical light sliced across the room, momentarily blinding me, pinning me against the cold stone of the fireplace. The sound of the door protesting under the sustained pressure was deafening, a physical countdown to my capture. I shoved the flash drive deep into the pocket of my coat, simultaneously trying to push the hidden compartment shut. But the mechanism jammed, leaving a small, dark gap visible in the mantelpiece, a fatal oversight. "Stop moving!" A voice boomed from beyond the door, deep, synthesized, and utterly devoid of human inflection. It wasn't the police. This was professional, organized, and terrifyingly efficient. I didn't hesitate. Survival mode, honed by months of fighting an invisible internal war, kicked in. I dove sideways, abandoning the desk, scrambling toward the narrow back window that faced the treacherous, rocky cliff edge. The lupus made my joints ache with fire, but adrenaline suppressed the pain, leaving only raw, urgent need. The front door finally gave way with a splintering crash, admitting two figures clad head to toe in black tactical gear. They moved with the synchronized precision of trained soldiers, weapons raised. They ignored the ledger lying open on the desk. They were looking for something specific, and I knew it was the drive. "Subject is mobile, cornered near west window," the synthesized voice barked into a comms unit. The first man swung his rifle toward me. I threw myself toward the window, kicking out with my foot to knock over a heavy antique chair as a clumsy, desperate barricade. It bought me less than a second. I grabbed the latch on the window, stuck fast, painted shut years ago, and slammed my elbow into the glass just above the frame. The old pane shattered outward with a sharp, brittle explosion. I didn't feel the cuts immediately, only the rush of icy sea salt air hitting my face. I squeezed through the jagged opening, tumbling onto the wet, slippery grass, just as the first muzzle flashes illuminated the interior of the cabin behind me. The sound of the gunfire was lost instantly to the roar of the ocean and the gale-force wind whipping around the headland. I rolled down the embankment, not caring that I was tearing my coat and scraping my skin raw against sharp shale. The ground was slick, sloping steeply toward the 100-foot drop to the churning black water below. I had to get away from the structure, away from the line of sight. I scrambled on hands and knees until I reached a cluster of thick, wind-battered juniper bushes, crawling deep into their thorny embrace, praying the darkness and the storm offered enough concealment. I pressed myself flat against the earth, listening. The tactical team was moving fast. I heard heavy boots crunching on the gravel path leading to the cabin, then the harsh sound of their movements outside, searching the immediate perimeter. They were methodical, sweeping the area with powerful flashlights that cut through the rain like physical beams. "No immediate visual on the target," one reported, his voice slightly closer this time. "Recommend perimeter search. She can't have gone far in this weather, especially with her condition." Her condition. They knew about the lupus. They knew everything. My mind raced back to the ledger. Daniel had said, "Protocol Omega initiated. My death is the decoy." If his death was fake, if he staged it to draw out these people, and gave them an asset to comply, then what was on that flash drive? And where was the real Daniel? Was he alive, hiding somewhere, orchestrating this entire elaborate game of sacrifice and misdirection? My frantic search for the flash drive confirmed it was still in my pocket, warm against my hip. I pulled it out carefully, examining the biometric lock. If it needed my heat signature to open, then the Swiss transfer, the one that used my money, must have been related to initiating some kind of necessary medical intervention for him, using my funds as collateral or bait. A beam of light swept dangerously close to the juniper bush, catching the wet leaves barely 10 feet away. I held my breath until my lungs burned. The beam moved on. They were concentrating their search further down the slope, toward the cliff edge, assuming I would try to escape toward the road. As the immediate threat passed, I used the momentary reprieve to examine the ledger again, flipping back to the part about the original asset. There was a hastily sketched diagram next to the entry, showing the beach cabin's layout, and etched over the fireplace where I had just found the compartment was a small symbol, a circle with a line bisecting it horizontally. Below the diagram, Daniel had scrawled 2 words, the key. I looked back at the jammed fireplace compartment. I hadn't found the key. I'd found the drive. If the drive was the asset he gave them to buy me time, then what was the key he referenced in the diagram? A sudden guttural shout came from the direction of the road. "Footprints! Heading down the bluff!" They were coming back up the slope, having swept the bottom. My time was up. I had to move now, and the only lead I had was that symbol and the word key. I frantically patted the pockets of my coat again, checking for anything else. Nothing. Then I remembered the beach cabin key itself, the heavy silver key ring Daniel had given me years ago. I pulled the key ring out. It was heavy. I looked at the first key, the one that opened the cabin door. Nothing special. I looked at the second key, a smaller, older brass key for an old storage chest we kept in the shed. Then I looked at the third key, a strange, ornate skeleton key, one I had always assumed was decorative, perhaps a souvenir. It was slightly tarnished, but distinct. I held the skeleton key up against the symbol Daniel had drawn in the ledger, the circle with the bisecting line. It was a perfect match. My heart leaped with a terrifying hope. This wasn't just a key to a chest, it was the key. But to what? Just then, one of the tactical figures burst through the outer line of bushes, spotting my coat in the gloom. He shouted, raising his weapon, the bright muzzle light fixing me like prey. I didn't have time to think, didn't have time to run further down the slick slope. Instinct took over one last time. I didn't throw the flash drive to distract him. I didn't throw the ledger. I lifted the skeleton key and hurled it, not at the man, but with all my strength, directly back toward the cabin window, aiming for the jagged opening I'd made. The key sailed through the rain, striking something inside the cabin with a sharp metallic clink that cut through the storm. For a second, there was silence from the attackers. They paused, listening to the unexpected sound from the structure they thought they had secured. Then, the synthesized voice barked, "Investigate interior sound, priority 1. As the two figures momentarily turned their attention back toward the building, I bolted. I didn't run toward the road. I plunged straight down the treacherous slope toward the cliff edge, using the dense scrub for cover. I knew the fall might kill me, but staying meant immediate capture by the people who seemingly murdered Daniel. I reached the very edge of the bluff, the wind threatening to tear me loose. Below, the waves crashed against the jagged rocks with terrifying violence. I crouched low, listening to the heavy footsteps of the agents scrambling back toward the broken window, and as they reached the threshold, a new sound erupted from within the cabin, a deep, mechanical whirring, followed by a sudden, deafening hiss of pressurized air. It wasn't the sound of an explosion. It sounded like a vault opening. And then, cutting through the mechanical noise, I heard a voice, strained but undeniably familiar, shouting from inside the cabin, "Ilara, go! Don't look back! I didn't die! I just became the decoy!" The voice, raw and vibrating with exertion, was the shock wave that finally knocked me off my feet. It was Daniel. Not a recording, not a ghost, but his living, breathing voice echoing from the structure I was fleeing. "Ilara, go! Don't look back! I didn't die! I just became the decoy!" My entire world tilted. The lupus, the exhaustion, the grief, it all dissolved into a white-hot, clarifying rage. He orchestrated his own death, faked a hemorrhage, used my money for a Swiss transfer, and left me to face down armed operatives, all while he was apparently hiding inside the very place they were hunting me. The mechanical sounds inside the cabin intensified, the hissing growing louder, the whirring sounding like heavy machinery being deployed. The two agents, having heard the voice, hesitated for a crucial second, their focus snapping from me to the source of the sound inside the cabin. "Hold, that's not possible! Sector 2, report!" The synthesized voice commanded into the comms unit, laced with genuine confusion now. I used that split-second reprieve. The agents were momentarily distracted by the possibility of their target, Daniel, being inside the structure, not realizing they had been played into a deadly game of misdirection. I launched myself away from the cliff edge, angling toward a narrow, almost invisible goat path that wound down the cliff face, shielded by an overhang of dense, damp ivy. It was suicidally steep, but it led away from the direct line of sight toward the road. As I clawed my way down the path, digging my fingers into the wet earth, the noise from the cabin escalated into a truly alarming crescendo. The pressurized hiss peaked, followed by a sound like massive sheets of metal being rapidly retracted. Then, a blinding, intensely white light, far brighter than the tactical beams, erupted from the cabin, flooding the immediate area and momentarily washing out the stormy twilight. The tactical operatives screamed, not in triumph, but in pain and surprise, shielding their eyes. I risked a glance upward. The entire front wall of the cabin, the section facing the ocean, was gone. Not blown out, but smoothly retracted, revealing the interior. The agents were disoriented, staggering backward from the sheer intensity of the light, and standing in the aperture where the wall used to be, backlit by that impossible white glare, was Daniel. He looked older, ravaged, his clothes torn, but he was undeniably alive. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was standing beside a complicated humming apparatus that looked like something ripped from a sci-fi movie set. He looked directly at my hiding spot, his eyes piercing through the rain and the distance. He mouthed something I couldn't hear over the environmental chaos, but the gesture was clear. Hurry. He then slammed his hand down on a large, glowing panel on the apparatus. The white light didn't dim. Instead, it seemed to coalesce, focusing into a single, rapidly expanding sphere directly in front of him. It was an energy field, or perhaps a portal. I couldn't tell, but it was clearly his emergency exit, the one he had been setting up while pretending to be dead. The agents recovered quickly, realizing their primary target was making a final, impossible escape. They began firing wildly toward the light, their bullets pinging uselessly off the humming energy barrier Daniel had deployed. "He's breaching containment! Stop him!" The synthesized voice shrieked, abandoning all pretense of stealth. Daniel didn't flinch under the barrage of gunfire. He stepped back slowly, pulling something else from the apparatus. A compact metallic case, perhaps the size of a briefcase. He then turned and looked down the cliff face toward me, offering a small, grim nod of final farewell. As he turned back toward the energy sphere, poised to step into it, the leading agent, clearly panicking, made a desperate move. He tossed a small, dark object that arced high over the heads of his comrades and landed directly inside the field of white energy, just inches from Daniel's feet. It wasn't a standard grenade. It looked like a compact tracking device, or maybe something designed to disrupt energy fields. Daniel saw it instantly. He didn't have time to react to the device, nor did he have time to step fully into the portal before the energy field began to flicker violently, the light sputtering like a dying star. He looked down at the intrusion, then back at me, his face a mask of devastating realization. He had bought me time, but he hadn't stopped the enemy's pursuit of the real prize. Then, with a sickening, wet thud, the main energy field collapsed inwards, imploding violently. There was no massive explosion. Instead, there was a sound like a colossal intake of breath, a vacuum. The sea mist, the rain, the sand, and the agents themselves seemed to warp inward toward the spot where Daniel and the apparatus had been. It was a localized, silent collapse of space. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Where Daniel, the specialized equipment, and the tactical team had been standing seconds before, there was only empty, scorched stone and the wind howling through the ruined remains of the beach cabin. The tactical agents were gone. Daniel was gone. The energy signature was gone. I was alone again on the precarious goat path, panting, covered in mud and cuts, staring into the void where my husband had just made his ultimate, final sacrifice. I fumbled for the flash drive in my pocket, needing confirmation that something real remained of his efforts. My fingers found the drive, but beneath it I felt something else, something small, cold, and incredibly sharp pressing into my palm. I pulled my hand out of the pocket to look. It wasn't the flash drive. It was a small, perfectly formed shard of crystalline material, humming faintly with residual heat. It looked like a fragment of the white energy field itself. As I turned it over in my palm, the shard suddenly pulsed, illuminating the inside of my coat lining. There, etched almost invisibly onto the cloth where the shard had rested, was a single tiny symbol, the same biometrics lock pattern from the flash drive. And beneath it, another inscription, clearly written in permanent marker, something Daniel must have done before entering the portal, something I would never have seen unless the crystalline fragment had activated the imprint. It read, "Asset secured. Now find the real key." It's not a key, it's the cure. The Swiss money paid for the extraction team to move me before they realized the drive was inert. You are safe, for now. Look for the blue heron. But the message was already fading, dissolving into the fabric, almost too fast to read. And as the last traces of ink vanished, the crystalline fragment in my hand went cold, inert, and the faint distant sound of a helicopter, searching, began to sweep across the churning ocean toward my position on the cliff. They were looking for me, not Daniel, and they knew I had the inert decoy, the flash drive, but they clearly didn't know I held a piece of the actual energy source, the one thing that could lead me to the blue heron and whatever cure Daniel had fought and seemingly died to secure for me. The sound of the approaching helicopter was the death knell of my momentary reprieve. It was a heavy, military-grade chopper, a stark contrast to the small civilian surveillance drones I'd mentally prepared for. They weren't just corporate rivals or intelligence agencies. They were military contractors, or worse. The crystalline fragment in my hand finally went completely cold, the cryptic message gone, leaving me with two tangible things: the useless feeling flash drive and the unsettling knowledge that Daniel was alive, extracted by his own contingency plan, now running for his life while I was the bait. I didn't climb further down the cliff. Climbing down meant entering the crashing waves and the rocks, a slow, agonizing death for someone with my fluctuating health. Climbing up meant walking straight into the path of the helicopter, searching the immediate vicinity of the ruined cabin. There was only one option left: concealment within the wreckage itself. I scrambled back up the ivy-covered path, my body screaming in protest, fueled only by the image of Daniel stepping into that blinding white light. I slipped back through the jagged, broken window opening, ignoring the bloodied glass shards. The interior of the cabin was a scene of absolute desolation. The space where the apparatus had been was scorched black, the stone floor visibly warped. The tactical agents were indeed gone, sucked into the vacuum collapse along with Daniel, or perhaps sucked into the portal just before it imploded. The only remaining evidence of the confrontation was scattered debris and the overturned chair. I ran to the scorched area. The key I had thrown, the ornate skeleton key, was lying on the black char, but it wasn't tarnished anymore. It glowed with a faint internal blue light, vibrating softly. This wasn't just a key, it was a trigger. I remembered Daniel's final words from the ledger. The key. It's the cure. I picked up the glowing skeleton key. It felt impossibly light, humming against my skin. It vibrated with the same frequency as the Swiss transfer notification, the frequency associated with the unknown private medical facility. This wasn't about stealing secrets. This was about accessing treatment. I looked at the flash drive in my other hand, the decoy, the one they were actively searching for. I had to make a choice, use the key now or try to escape with the decoy. The helicopter noise was deafening now, beating directly overhead, searching the wreckage. They were descending. I jammed the glowing skeleton key into the only remaining intact lock in the room, the heavy, rusted padlock on the old storage shed outside. It wasn't the lock I had aimed for earlier, but I had no time for precision. The moment the key touched the metal, the lock didn't click open. It dissolved into blue smoke. The shed door swung inward. Inside wasn't fishing gear or dusty furniture. It was a small, sterile operating theater, complete with life support machinery, humming quietly in the gloom. And tethered to the central console, hooked up to monitors displaying complex genetic markers and ongoing infusion lines, was a man. It was Daniel. He was pale, connected to tubes, but unmistakably alive. He was wearing a hospital gown beneath his torn coat, not military gear. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed but intensely focused. "Alara, you found it. Good. I didn't know if the key would work without the main power grid, but it's hardwired to the emergency beacon." "Daniel, what in God's name is happening?" I choked out, running to him, ignoring the roar of the approaching chopper. "The lupus," he whispered, grasping my hand, his grip startlingly strong. "It wasn't lupus, not entirely. That was the misdiagnosis, the cover story they fed you when I started showing the first symptoms 5 years ago. The condition is advanced, rare neurological decay linked to my research. The treatment is experimental, highly illegal, and requires constant specialized support. I couldn't be near you, Alara. The pathogen spreads through proximity, dormant until triggered by severe emotional stress. Like me leaving you." He winced, his eyes flicking toward the monitoring equipment. "The people hunting us, they finance the research. They own the cure. The Swiss transfer was my payment for their extraction team to pull me out of the failed hospice treatment before they could isolate the pathogen strain they needed. The flash drive was the decoy. It contains the proof of their illegal trials. My death was to separate me from the disease vector. You. The collapsing light. The vacuum. A localized spatial distortion device, a failsafe built into the shed's power core. It scrambled their sensors and gave me 5 minutes of pure, silent darkness to initiate the next step. I knew if I didn't get the key to you, they would track you down as the carrier." The helicopter was landing on the driveway now, the downdraft whipping the shed door violently. Figures in dark uniforms were sprinting toward the structure. Daniel pulled a syringe from a nearby sterile compartment. It contained a clear, rapidly moving fluid. "This is the second phase of the treatment. It stabilizes the viral load until we reach the true safe zone. You have to take it now, Alara. It's keyed to the pathogen markers they accidentally left in your system during your initial diagnosis." I looked at the syringe, then at the door rattling under the assault of the arriving agents. I couldn't inject myself and protect him. No, I said firmly, pushing the syringe back toward him. You're the one who needs this. You're the one who's been fighting this for years. Daniel looked at me, a profound sadness replacing the manic energy in his eyes. I can't. The data on the drive, the one they think they are hunting, that's my proof, my leverage. If they get it, they erase every trace of their atrocities, including your false diagnosis. I have to run interference. I have to lead them away long enough for you to get safe. He reached up and weakly pressed a small, almost invisible button on the side of the containment unit. A secondary, smaller panel slid open on the side of the shed, revealing a narrow tunnel disappearing into the darkness beneath the rocks, leading presumably toward the sea. Go. That tunnel leads to the safe boat waiting for the blue heron extraction. Use the crystalline shard. It's a resonance key. It will guide you. Tell them Daniel Hayes sent you. I'm going to send them on a very long chase with this decoy drive. He shoved the flash drive into my hand, pressing the crystalline shard into the same palm. When you're safe, destroy the drive. Then live, Alara. Live for both of us. The door splintered again, hinges groaning under the force. The first figure in tactical gear burst through, weapon leveled, shining his light directly at Daniel. Daniel didn't look at the agent. He looked at me, a tear finally escaping his eye. I am so sorry for leaving you alone. And then, with a strength I didn't know he possessed, Daniel ripped the main infusion line from his arm, grabbed the heavy monitoring console, and hurled it with surprising force at the charging operative. The console struck the man, knocking him off balance, sending sparks flying. Daniel didn't follow me into the escape tunnel. Instead, he grabbed the inert flash drive from my hand, injected himself with the clear fluid, and then deliberately staggered out of the shed toward the incoming hostiles, waving the decoy drive above his head. "You want this? Come and get it!" he yelled, his voice echoing with a false bravado that was meant only to distract. I watched, horrified and resolute, as the agents swarmed him, guns trained, completely focused on the flash drive he was waving. They hadn't seen the tunnel. They hadn't seen the key. Tears streaming down my face, I clutched the crystalline shard and scrambled backward into the narrow, black tunnel. Just as I disappeared into the darkness, the sound of shouting and struggle erupted from the shed, followed by the sickening, sharp sound of multiple suppressed gunfire reports. The fighting stopped abruptly. The last thing I saw before the tunnel swallowed me whole, plunging me into absolute blackness, was the faint, residual blue glow of the key in my pocket, guiding me toward the open, waiting sea, carrying with me the secret knowledge of a selfless sacrifice that had cost Daniel his freedom, perhaps his life, but had bought me the only thing that mattered, a chance at survival, and the cure he had been chasing for us both. I was alone, but I was alive, heading toward the blue heron, the memory of his final desperate act burning brighter than any tactical light.